Christmas Eve, a shattered city buried in snow and ash. A cracked church bell ringing unevenly through gunfire as 540 Marines sat trapped inside a kill zone with radios dead, drones destroyed, and air support cancelled for political reasons. Someone whispering from a trench that they'd been left behind. 2 kilometers away, on a partially collapsed rooftop, a 17-year-old female sniper chambered a round into a rifle still sealed by official order, the instruction echoing in her mind. Do not fire, as she settled her aim. Knowing the lives of 540 people hinged on her choice this Christmas Eve, snow drifting like static through smoke, while Captain Owen Hale crouched behind fractured concrete watching his breath fog the freezing air. The off-key church bell chiming again somewhere in the ruins, obscene against the rattle of automatic weapons. "Second platoon reports 3 wounded, sir," Lieutenant Mark Keller said, with his hand pressed to his earpiece pinned in the factory, unable to move. Hale checking his watch at 20:47, 6 hours into what should have been a simple civilian evacuation, turned textbook ambush. The enemy letting them reach the heart of the city before closing the trap. Ordering them to hold position while claiming exfil was being worked, a lie Keller recognized, as 540 Marines from 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines had entered Black Ridge at 15:30 on intelligence that 200 civilians were trapped in the Southern District. A humanitarian mission gone wrong with heavy machine guns on upper floors and mortars raining from the northern ridge. A weaponized commercial drone already destroying the command vehicle and radio repeater. Hale's tactical display glowing red with enemy icons encircling them as Marines lay scattered across 12 buildings under fire from every direction. Keller quietly reporting that Colonel Victor Ames wanted a sitrep as Hale keyed the radio requesting immediate KS. Combat ineffective, multiple casualties, low ammo, no safe exfil, only to be told air support was denied due to political complications and to stand by. Hale demanding support for wounded who wouldn't survive the night before the line went dead. Keller staring as Hale confirmed they'd been abandoned. Marines huddled behind cover. Most barely adults who joked about Christmas leave that morning now frozen on stairwells gripping rifles and waiting for orders that wouldn't come. Private Eli Carter, 17, from a small Montana town, looking up with wide eyes and asking if no one was coming, Hale meeting his gaze and lying once more. "They're working on it, Carter. Just hang on," Hale said, even as he knew the words were hollow, because Captain Owen Hale had spent 14 years in the Marine Corps and understood exactly what phrases like political situation and standby really meant when you were already 6 hours deep into an ambush, and it meant you were expendable, nothing more. The church bell rang again, small and broken, marking time as it counted down the hours until Christmas Day, hours that 540 Marines might never reach. While 300 kilometers away at the Coalition Forward Operating Base, Colonel Victor Ames stood in the Tactical Operations Center, staring at a satellite feed of Black Ridge. Thermal imagery showing his Marines as scattered orange clusters across the ruined city, surrounded by a massive red mass of enemy forces. "Give me options," Ames said, and Major Caroline Vickers brought up a tactical overlay, explaining they could authorize precision strikes here and here to carve out an extraction corridor. But it would take 4 FA-18s before a firm no cut in from the far side of the room, and everyone turned as Ambassador Richard Thornton stepped forward with 2 State Department aides, a tall man in his 60s wearing a suit that looked absurd in a war room. Ames choosing his words carefully, as he said his Marines were dying in that city. Thornton replying calmly that he understood, but reminding him that ceasefire negotiations would begin in Geneva in 7 hours. Warning that launching airstrikes on Christmas Eve would hand the enemy a propaganda victory and erase 6 months of diplomatic progress. Ames pushing back that those were American Marines, 540 lives, only to be met with Thornton's cold calculation that it was soldiers versus a peace deal that could save thousands, the president having made escalation off-limits during the ceasefire window. Thornton adding that the Marines had entered the city against his advice and accepted the risk. Ames clenching his jaw and replying, "They went in to save civilians," something he respected, but Thornton refusing to jeopardize an entire peace process over what he called a tactical mistake. Glancing at the screen and asking how long they could last. Maybe 12 hours, maybe less. Deciding then that they would hold until talks concluded at 800, after which recovery operations would be authorized, even though by then they might be dead or captured. Calling it the reality of modern warfare where soldiers sometimes become politically inconvenient before turning and walking out. Leaving Ames standing with clenched fists as the thermal images of his Marines flickered. Major Vickers quietly asking what they should tell Captain Hale. Ames closing his eyes and answering in a hollow voice. "Tell him to stand by. Tell him we're working on it. And if he asks about air support, tell him," Ames said after swallowing hard. "Tell him they aren't a priority tonight." Major Vickers staring back in disbelief as she started to object, before he cut her off with a flat reminder that those were his orders and she was to carry them out. And as she walked away, Colonel Victor Ames turned back to the screen where 540 orange signatures sat ringed by red, slowly blinking out in a frozen city on Christmas Eve. After 32 years in the Marine Corps, he had lost men before, but he had never been told to abandon them while they were still fighting. The broken church bell in Blackridge chiming faintly through the satellite feed, as if mocking him, "Merry Christmas." While far away, Captain Rachel Donovan lay perfectly still on a rooftop, her breath forming faint clouds that vanished in the wind. 4 hours into her position, barely moving, barely breathing, snow piling onto her ghillie suit until she blended into the ruins, watching Marines die through her scope. Not in some dramatic rush, but in the slow, grinding rhythm of an ambush as ammunition dwindled, morale cracked, and hope bled out, her optics settling on a disciplined enemy machine gunner atop the old textile factory, firing controlled bursts and shifting positions, already responsible for a dozen casualties. Her finger resting beside the trigger guard because her orders were explicit. Observe only. Do not engage. Orders she knew well after 11 years as a Marine sniper. One of only 3 women to complete scout sniper training, and the only one still active. Her confirmed kills, classified though rumors put the number well above 70, earning her the call sign Winter for the cold precision of her work. A reputation that had cost her dearly 3 years earlier in another city when peacekeeping orders to observe and report had forced her to watch enemy troops surround a school sheltering 32 children, waiting on command until the moment soldiers breached the doors, at which point she chose 12 shots for 12 targets, saving the children and ending her career, court-martialed for disobeying orders. The case dismissed under public sympathy, but her future effectively sealed as she was reassigned, downgraded, and her rifle locked away under official seal. 3 years spent training recruits and trying to forget what it felt like to save lives until new orders 2 weeks ago sent her back to the Blackridge region as a forward observer. Her rifle returned still sealed with the message clear: "Watch, don't fight." And now on Christmas Eve she was watching Marines die again, shifting slightly as her scope swept the city. 17 enemy positions mapped, fire lanes plotted, patrol patterns logged, 3 encrypted reports sent, and only 1 response received. Continue observation, no engagement authorized, as she watched a young Marine no older than 20 drag his wounded squad leader through a storm of concrete dust, screaming for a medic that wasn't coming. Her finger twitching as the enemy gunner adjusted his aim, crosshairs settling at 1,147 meters with northeast wind at 12 knots and snow-cutting visibility. Her breath easing out as she didn't fire, the Marine barely making cover while his leader didn't. Rachel closing her eyes for a single second before returning to watching because that was the order. Until through an encrypted channel she wasn't supposed to monitor, she heard Captain Owen Hale's voice requesting immediate KS. Combat ineffective. Casualties mounting. No safe extraction, followed by Colonel Ames's reply that they were not a priority tonight. Her jaw tightening as she stared at the official seal wrapped around her rifle, knowing breaking it would end her career for good. The church bell echoing through the snow as her hand reached out and stopped millimeters short. Her thoughts drifting to the photograph in her pack of Corporal David Chen with his wife and daughters outside their San Diego home, dated 3 years earlier, one of the Marines she had saved by disobeying orders, his letter from last month thanking her for giving him the chance to watch his children grow. A reminder she couldn't answer, as she lifted her eyes back to the scope and watched the Marines in Blackridge. Somewhere below her were more men like David Chen, more fathers and mothers, sons and daughters, people with families waiting back home, people who had just been told they were not a priority. As her tactical radio crackled with encrypted traffic from the TOC ordering all observation posts to hold position with no engagement under any circumstances due to the political situation requiring total restraint. Rachel pressing her transmit button long enough to answer, OP7 acknowledged, before switching the radio off completely, knowing the seal on her rifle was tamper-evident plastic stamped with official markings, and that breaking it would leave undeniable proof of disobedience with no explanations this time. No sympathetic jury and no public pressure to save her. Only dishonorable discharge, loss of pension, maybe prison, but also the chance that 540 Marines might live. Rachel drawing a slow breath and taking in the city through her scope one last time. Locking on to the enemy commander in the old municipal building on the 4th floor, northwest corner. A tall man in a dark coat. She'd watched for hours coordinating the ambush with radios and hand signals, stepping to the window every few minutes to admire his kill box. The keystone of the entire operation, knowing that if he fell, the enemy's coordination would shatter and the Marines would gain a narrow window to regroup, break out, and survive. One shot being all it would take, and one shot she had been explicitly ordered not to fire. Rachel reaching down and peeling the official seal from her rifle as the plastic tore with a faint crack that sounded impossibly loud in the frozen silence. Her career ending in that instant as she settled into position and began checking variables. Wind speed, humidity, temperature, pressure. The distance just over 2 kilometers. A shot where dozens of factors mattered, the bullet dropping roughly 15 meters in flight. Wind pushing it sideways. Cold air altering ballistics. One chance only, because a miss meant instant detection and death and, worse, the loss of the Marines' only unseen advantage. While a hit meant court-martial, but also the possibility that 540 people would live, Rachel starting her breathing cycle, 4 seconds in, 4 hold, 4 out, her heart rate slowing from 50 to 45 to 40 as the enemy commander stepped back to the window, her finger easing onto the trigger, his face clear in her scope despite the distance. Younger than she'd expected, maybe 40, neatly trimmed beard, probably a family of his own, probably believing he was right. But he had chosen to trap 540 Marines in a kill box on Christmas Eve. Just as she had chosen 3 years earlier in another city to trust her conscience over her orders. A choice she made again now as the crosshairs settled center mass for margin at that range. Inhale, hold, exhale, and at the natural pause she pressed the trigger, the rifle cracking once and echoing across the frozen city as the 338 Lapua Magnum left the barrel at 936 meters per second. Rachel steady as she watched through her scope. Not the bullet itself, but the calculated corrections compensating for wind and distance. 2.24 seconds of flight time before the round struck the commander just below the collarbone as he turned away from the window. The impact hurling him backward into the room, 3 full seconds of nothing afterward. The city frozen with Marines pinned and enemies holding position, and the church bell silent between automated rings, and then everything breaking loose as Rachel watched chaos ripple outward from the municipal building. Enemy fighters spilled onto the 4th-floor balcony, shouting and pointing in every direction, completely unsure where the shot had come from as the sound bounced through the ruins and made triangulation impossible. And worse, they had no way of knowing if another round was already on the way. Panic spreading fast because fear is contagious. The machine gunner on the textile factory roof, the one methodically cutting down Marines, abandoning his nest and bolting for the stairwell as others followed. Coordination unraveling as units acted on their own instincts, scrambling for cover, shifting positions, fleeing imagined lines of fire. Someone inside the municipal building yelling orders in thick, Russian-accented English that carried no authority without the commander to back it up. And in that window of chaos, the Marines finally moved. Rachel watching Captain Owen Hale break from cover and signal his scattered elements, unaware of what had caused the enemy collapse, but sharp enough to recognize opportunity when it appeared. His voice cutting across the tactical net, as Viper 1 calling out that the enemy was disorganized, ordering 2nd and 3rd platoons to bound to the church, while 1st and 4th laid down cover, telling them to move now, the Marines responding like a single organism, using confusion to consolidate as wounded, were dragged to safety, ammunition redistributed, and defensive positions reinforced. The enemy trying to regroup but failing without centralized command as independent units made costly mistakes. Rachel shifting her scope back to the textile factory, where a replacement gunner had taken position and was firing wildly without discipline, her watching him for 30 seconds, calculating angles, then dialing 2 degrees left and firing, the round slamming into concrete 18 inches from his head, blasting him with fragments and dust and sending him diving for cover for good. Rachel allowing herself a cold smile because she didn't need to kill him. Fear worked just as well. 4 more rounds fired over the next 20 minutes. All suppression shots meant to keep the enemy scattered and uncertain, never directly targeting personnel again, just walls, equipment, barriers near their positions. 5 shots total that completely reshaped the battlefield. By 22:30 hours, the Marines consolidated into 2 hardened positions, one inside the old church and another in a reinforced apartment block. Most wounded evacuated and overlapping fields of fire established to make any assault costly. The enemy pulling back to their perimeter confused and leaderless, as Rachel watched through her scope with grim satisfaction until the radio she'd shut off crackled to life on an emergency override. Badger 6 broadcasting that an unknown shooter had violated engagement protocols in Black Ridge and demanding all observation posts report immediately. Rachel staring at the radio before picking it up and throwing it off the roof because protocol mattered less than ensuring 540 Marines lived to see Christmas morning. While inside the church bell tower, Lieutenant Mark Keller crouched, trying to understand how 20 minutes earlier they'd been preparing to die, and now were organized and dug in with an enemy that seemed almost afraid to push, when a voice called up from below. Private Eli Carter shouting that he'd found something. Lieutenant Mark Keller climbed down the ladder as Eli Carter knelt beside a pile of rubble, holding up a twisted shard of metal, Keller asking what it was, while Carter explained it came from one of the rounds that hit nearby, and told him to look at the scoring as he angled it toward the flashlight, pointing out it wasn't standard enemy ammo but precision match grade, probably .338 Lapua Magnum. Keller turning the fragment over in his hand with the practiced eye of a Marine infantry officer on his third tour, knowing ammunition when he saw it. Carter murmuring that someone was covering them, someone with a serious rifle, then asking who it could be since there were no sniper teams in the area. Keller staring out through the shattered church window at distant rooftops, realizing whoever fired that shot had done so from at least 2 kilometers away. An insane distance requiring professional-level skill, likely military. But raising the question of why a friendly sniper would be operating without coordination, the thought cut short as his radio crackled and he keyed the mic, calling for a casualty and ammo report. The reply coming back that they had 23 wounded, 4 critical, and ammunition down to 30%. Keller starting to add something before Captain Owen Hale cut in, saying he'd seen the shots and knew someone was out there, admitting they didn't know who and that right now it didn't matter, telling them to be ready if they got another opening. While over the next hour the unseen sniper continued shaping the fight without killing anyone else, rounds snapping past enemy positions to force them into cover, a radio antenna shattered to sever communications. A fuel can punched through to create a dramatic but non-lethal fire that pulled attention away from Marine positions. All of it masterful battlefield manipulation, using minimal force for maximum psychological impact. Hale later gathering his platoon commanders in the church basement and spreading a map across a broken pew, telling them they had maybe a 3-hour window before the enemy regrouped and that he wanted to use it to harden positions and prep for extraction whenever higher command finally got their heads out of their asses. Keller hesitating before admitting he'd monitored the command net, and there would be no extraction. The room going silent as Hale asked flatly what he meant, and Keller explained Ambassador Richard Thornton had shut down all offensive operations during ceasefire negotiations, meaning they were on their own until morning. Staff Sergeant Marcus Wright finally breaking the silence by stating the obvious that they'd been abandoned. Hale calling it temporary, though even he didn't sound convinced. Wright pointing out there was nothing temporary about being dead, and that the only reason they were still alive was the sniper who'd bought them time. Warning that once the enemy realized there was only one shooter, they'd press again. Hale nodding and saying they'd make sure that didn't happen by ordering Keller to take 3 men and simulate sniper fire from multiple positions, using M110s to sell the illusion of several marksmen. Keller agreeing it might work, but asking about the real sniper and whether they should try to make contact. Hale pointing out their radios were short range and deciding whoever it was operating alone and off the books, their best move being to exploit the chaos and prepare to fight out at first light. Even as Hale thought about the fragment Carter had shown him, the precision those shots required, and the fact that someone with extraordinary skill had knowingly violated direct orders to save them, someone who would likely pay for that choice. The church bell ringing again as another hour ticked toward Christmas, while in the frozen ruins of Blackridge 540 Marines prepared to survive the night. And far away, Colonel Victor Ames stood before a satellite display with a face carved from stone, ordering Major Vickers to show him the footage again. Watching the replay of a single bright flash from a rooftop 2.1 kilometers north of the city at 0229 hours, followed 3 seconds later by the enemy commander's thermal signature going dark. 4 more shots over the next 20 minutes, all confirmed as suppression fire. Ames asking for analysis and being told it was a precision rifle, likely .338 or 300 Win Mag, with a shooter skilled beyond what most military snipers could manage under ideal conditions, let alone at night in a snowstorm, confirming no friendly sniper teams were in the area, and all designated marksmen were accounted for and complying with engagement restrictions. Ames staring at the screen before asking who the hell was shooting. Vickers pulling up another display and noting one observation post in that sector, OP7, roughly 2.3 kilometers from the firing position, hesitating before answering that it was manned by Captain Rachel Donovan, the name hanging in the air as Ames quietly repeated it, recognizing the officer who'd been court-martialed for disobeying orders. Vickers confirming she'd been assigned to observation duty 3 weeks earlier with strict instructions not to engage and that her rifle had been issued under official seal, adding that contact with OP7 had been lost at SO225, 4 minutes before the first shot. Ames closing his eyes before opening them and ordering that Ambassador Thornton be brought to him immediately. And 10 minutes later, Thornton standing in the TOC visibly irritated as he began to speak, only to be cut off. "Someone shot the enemy commander in Blackridge," Victor Ames said, cutting Thornton off, stating it was a precision rifle shot from roughly 2,100 meters, and that they believed Captain Rachel Donovan had acted against direct orders. Thornton's expression never changing as he replied that she should be arrested, if not now, then when she returned. Court-martialed without hesitation, insisting that this level of insubordination could not be tolerated, especially with ceasefire talks already fragile. Dismissing the argument that she had saved 540 Marines by countering that she had violated orders during a critical diplomatic window, with Russian media already claiming escalation and warning that if it became public knowledge, an American sniper killed an enemy commander on Christmas Eve, it would erase 6 months of negotiations. Ames firing back that those Marines were alive because of her, only to be met with Thornton's cold response that he had been prepared to authorize a negotiated withdrawal at 800, and that Donovan's interference may have destroyed that option, ordering Ames again to arrest her quietly to avoid an international incident. Something snapping inside Ames after 32 years of obedience, restraint, and watching soldiers traded for political convenience as he said no. Repeating it when Thornton questioned him, refusing to arrest Donovan for saving American lives and promising that if charges were pursued, he would force the process into full public record. Thornton warning him he was making a serious mistake, and Ames replying that he had made plenty that night, but this would not be one of them. Turning to Major Vickers and ordering a full report, including ballistics, casualty projections without Donovan's intervention, and a timeline of command decisions, directing it to the Commandant, the Secretary of Defense, and the Armed Services Committee, dismissing classification concerns by ordering it declassified and placed on record. Thornton accusing him of ending his career, and Ames agreeing, but stating he would at least know he hadn't abandoned his Marines. Asking Thornton if he could say the same, watching him leave without another word, as Vickers quietly remarked, it was career suicide, and Ames replied that the kids in Blackridge deserved better than being sacrificed for a Geneva photo op. His eyes returning to the thermal display, showing 540 orange signatures still holding in the frozen city, as he ordered Captain Owen Hale brought up on a secure line, saying it was time he knew the truth about what had happened, and about Captain Donovan, adding with a grim smile to tell her she was fired again, and to wish her good hunting. Dawn breaking over Blackridge at 0647 as Hale stood in the church doorway, watching the sky fade from black to gray to pale blue. Snow settled into a pristine blanket that almost looked peaceful. Keller approaching with a clipboard and reporting final numbers, all 540 accounted for, 28 wounded, 4 critical but stable, 0 killed in action. Hale staring in disbelief at the word 0, as Keller explained the sniper had bought them enough time to consolidate and dig in. The enemy pulling back around 0300 and never pressing again, defying every tactical expectation that should have cost them at least 30% casualties. Staff Sergeant Wright arriving with word that command had authorized a negotiated withdrawal, and the enemy had agreed to allow movement to the northern extraction point without interference. Hale remarking dryly that negotiations suddenly seemed possible now that the enemy commander was dead, his replacement more interested in not being targeted by a ghost sniper than continuing the fight. Hale gazing across the ruined city, knowing someone unseen on a distant rooftop had saved them all. One shooter, one rifle, one night. Wright admitting they didn't know who it was, but that instructors from Quantico said only one sniper could make shots like that. A woman called Winter, who'd been court-martialed years earlier for saving children in a school and was considered the best they'd ever seen. Hale feeling his chest tighten at the thought that she'd risked everything again for them. Marines beginning to pack up, carry wounded on makeshift stretchers, and maintain security as someone softly began singing Silent Night. The song spreading until tired, cracked voices filled the church. Hale blinking back emotion as Christmas morning arrived, and they stood alive, saved by a woman who had given up everything so they could go home. Just as Private Eli Carter approached, holding something carefully wrapped in cloth. "Sir, I wanted to show you something," Eli Carter said, carefully unwrapping a piece of cloth to reveal a single spent cartridge casing, polished smooth and etched with coordinates, explaining he'd found it on a rooftop about a kilometer away and figured it must have dropped when she repositioned, holding it to the light and pointing out the engraving as Captain Owen Hale took the casing and read the tiny words, "For those worth saving," followed by the initials RD. Hale handing it back and telling Carter to keep it, adding that when they got home, he wanted every man and woman in the battalion to know what had happened here, and to understand that someone had cared enough to risk everything for them when their own command was ready to write them off. The sun climbing higher as the 540 Marines of 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines began moving toward the extraction point in tight formation, with weapons ready and eyes scanning, finding no resistance as the enemy watched from distant rooftops and windows, but never fired. The mysterious sniper having become a myth, a ghost in the snow capable of killing from impossible distances. No one eager to be the next target. The extraction lasting 3 hours until by 1,000 the last Marine boarded the transports. Hale taking one final look at Blackridge, the ruined church, the broken bell, the snow-covered streets where they'd nearly died, and murmuring a quiet thank you to the city, the ruins, and the sniper he would never meet, before climbing aboard and leaving the place where 540 people had been left for dead and somehow survived. While Rachel Donovan sat in a military police holding cell with her hands folded and her face calm. The room small but clean with a bunk, sink, and toilet. Better than some places she'd slept on deployment. Christmas lights visible through the small window as the door opened and Colonel Victor Ames entered alone, addressing her formally before telling her to sit, taking the chair and studying her in silence before asking if she understood what she'd done. Rachel answering evenly that she had violated direct orders, broken the seal on her rifle, and engaged during a diplomatic ceasefire window. Ames replying that she'd saved 540 Marines. Rachel saying simply that she'd done her job. Ames explaining that Ambassador Thornton wanted her court-martialed, dishonorably discharged, possibly imprisoned. Rachel accepting that without flinching, Ames adding that the commandant wanted to award her a private medal that could never be made official. Rachel declining it, saying she didn't need one. Ames asking what she did need and granting her permission to speak freely, as she told him the Corps had to decide whether it valued orders or lives more, because right now they seemed incompatible, and if that was true, she didn't belong anymore. Ames quiet for a long time before admitting he'd told Thornton to go to hell and would likely lose his star or his career. But he couldn't punish her for doing the right thing while he retired with honors for abandoning his Marines, explaining the official report would attribute the enemy collapse to unknown causes. Hale's after-action would credit improved defenses due to enemy disorganization, and she would be reassigned stateside and medically discharged for PTSD with full benefits, an honorable record, and protection from future charges. Rachel realizing he was protecting her, Ames correcting that he was protecting the Corps from its own bureaucratic cowardice, and ensuring anyone who tried to come after her would have to walk through a paper trail that made them look monstrous, dismissing her denial of being a hero by telling her she was a Marine who made the hard call when others lacked the courage, wishing her a Merry Christmas and thanking her before leaving. Rachel sitting alone, listening to distant carols, having saved 540 lives and lost her career again, accepting the trade as she lay back on the bunk, and 6 months later with the story still buried. The official record stating that 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, had completed a successful civilian evacuation in Blackridge with minimal casualties due to effective defensive tactics. Ambassador Thornton's ceasefire negotiations moved forward without issue. Colonel Victor Ames retired with full honors while quietly declining the traditional promotion to Brigadier General, and Captain Rachel Donovan was medically discharged and vanished completely from public view. But within the Marine Corps, the truth spread fast, passed from bar to bar from Camp Pendleton to Quantico, as veterans told the story of how 540 Marines were left behind on Christmas Eve, how a young female sniper defied direct orders to save them all, how she made an impossible shot from more than 2 kilometers away in the middle of a snowstorm. The details growing with each retelling, some swearing she fired with one eye closed, others claiming she was wounded, a few insisting she dropped a dozen enemies with a single round. Yet the heart of the story never changed. One person had risked everything when it mattered most. And within 2nd Battalion, a quiet tradition took shape as every Christmas Eve those who had been in Blackridge gathered wherever they were in the world and laid 540 playing cards face up on a table, one for each life saved, with a single 338 Lapua Magnum casing polished to a mirror shine placed at the center. No speeches and no ceremony, just silent recognition of the woman who became a legend. Captain Owen Hale keeping the original casing in a shadow box in his office after being promoted to major and given command of his own battalion. A single photograph on his desk showing his Marines standing alive in front of the Blackridge Church on Christmas morning. A reminder he never forgot of what it had cost to keep them that way. Lieutenant Mark Keller later becoming a sniper instructor at Quantico, where he taught students about the impossible shot, the distance, the wind, the stakes, always telling them that technical skill might make you good, but the courage to pull the trigger when it truly mattered was what made you a legend. Private Eli Carter finishing his enlistment and returning home to Montana with a cartridge casing kept in his wallet as proof that someone had cared enough to save him when he was just another disposable kid in a war zone, and Rachel Donovan living alone in a small cabin high in the mountains of Colorado, as far from military life as she could manage, never speaking about Blackridge, never acknowledging the legend tied to her name, never answering the occasional journalist who found her, but every Christmas Eve sitting on her porch with a cup of coffee and staring out at snow-covered peaks, thinking about 540 people still alive because she trusted her conscience over her orders, a choice she had made twice and paid for twice with her career, a choice she would make again without hesitation, because in the end, she wasn't just a soldier following commands, but a human being who refused to watch others die when she had the power to stop it. And that was legacy enough. While back in Blackridge, the church bell repaired by local volunteers rang clear and strong every Christmas Eve at midnight. Marines who had been there swearing you could hear it for miles, and some insisting that in the silence between the chimes there was another sound. A single sharp crack echoing across the frozen city. The sound of one shot, one decision, and 540 lives saved.